All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring a really fascinating synthesis of modern psychology, silent emotional burdens, and an ancient biblical narrative. We're going to weave these seemingly different threads together to unpack a very specific, yet incredibly universal human experience. We're talking about a certain kind of smile and the hidden heavy weight it carries. We'll start by looking at a modern, everyday struggle. Take, for example, fathers and immigrants. People who've relocated to unfamiliar places and are just weighed down by this immense responsibility to provide for and protect their families. Because they feel they literally have to stay strong, they can't exactly show fear or sadness, right? So when they're faced with insurmountable walls and circumstances they simply cannot control, they mask that helplessness. And they do it behind a cynical, silent expression known in Korean as Sanghyun, the bitter smile. It's basically a smirk of total resignation.
Now, what's really interesting here is this stark contrast between two very different environments when it comes to expressing that hidden vulnerability. In the secular world, which is so driven by competition and profit, revealing your true struggling emotions, well, that's often seen as exposing a weakness, a liability that could totally be used against you. But contrast this with the environment of the church, acting as a safe sanctuary built on sacrifice rather than competition. In this kind of safe space, emotional honesty isn't a weakness at all. Actually, it becomes a channel for empathy and love. It's a place where you can finally drop that bitter smile.
Part 1. Sarah's Hidden Laughter, a Biblical Reflection. Let's look at the timeline that sets up our story in Genesis. First, an immense life-changing promise is given to Abraham and Sarah that they're going to have a child and become a great nation. But then, crickets. Literally nothing happens. 25 years of crushing silence pass by. I mean, imagine holding on to a promise for a quarter of a century with zero physical evidence that it'll actually come true. Naturally, their hopeful expectation completely dissolves into despair and deep, deep disappointment. So the crucial point hits at this very specific moment. Sarah is now nearly 90 years old. Her body is telling her that having a child is just physically impossible. But suddenly, 3 mysterious guests arrive at their tent and casually announce that by this time next year, Sarah will have a son. Now, Sarah is hiding behind the tent door listening to all this, and what does she do? She laughs. But listen, she doesn't laugh out of joy. No, this is the ancient equivalent of our modern bitter smile. It's a laugh of absolute, pure cynicism.
Moving on to Part 2, the trap of cognitive closure, the psychology of waiting. To understand why Sarah reacted this way, we have to look at a fascinating concept coined by social psychologist Ari Kruglansky back in 1994 called cognitive closure. It perfectly describes a mind that just shuts the door to hope simply because waiting in the unknown is way too psychologically painful. You see, when the ambiguity of will it happen or won't it becomes totally unbearable, the human brain kind of panics and rushes to a firm, finalized answer, even if that answer is a negative, tragic one. It's essentially a defense mechanism to stop the pain of waiting. To really anchor this clinically, let's look at a powerful anecdote. A psychologist counseled a 55-year-old wife who felt deeply abandoned by her husband during a crisis a decade earlier. Over the next 10 years, even as the husband tried to change and make new promises, she remained entirely indifferent to him. When she was asked about his new promises, she just said, "I already know how it will end, so I just smiled bitterly." She literally couldn't bear the vulnerability of hoping again, so she preemptively shut down her emotional receptivity. And you know what? This perfectly mirrors our historical narrative. Just like that wife in the clinic, Sarah's 25 years of profound disappointment locked her into this state of cognitive closure. She had already firmly concluded, "I'm too old, this is over." Her emotional door was dead-bolted shut. So when a new promise of a son was made to her, she was completely immune to it. That bitter smile behind the tent door, that was her shield. It was her way of preventing herself from getting hurt by false hope just one more time. Which brings us to Part 3, God's piercing question, divine intervention. Right at the climax of the narrative, the divine guest turns to Abraham and asks, "Why did Sarah laugh?" Now, usually we tend to read this as a divine scolding, right? Like a punishment for her lack of faith. But it actually isn't a reprimand at all. It's something much, much more profound. The guest then follows up with, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" And instead of a threat, this response is presented as an empathetic challenge. It directly targets the rigid stone walls of Sarah's cognitive closure. It's basically a psychological intervention, straight from the divine. It asks her a deeply penetrating question.
Is your personal conclusion, the one based on your physical timeline and your past disappointments, actually more powerful than the possibilities of the divine? It's a profound invitation for Sarah to realize that her self-imposed closure is artificially limiting her reality. The divine is essentially telling her, hey, your reality is not the ultimate reality. Sarah, obviously terrified at being caught, immediately denies laughing. But God simply replies, no, you laughed. And honestly, this is the beautiful part. God isn't pressing the issue just to condemn her. He's validating her hidden pain. By saying, I heard you, he's proving he sees right through those emotional defenses, right through that bitter smile behind the tent door. He fully acknowledges her deep pain, yet he insists that his promise remains unbroken. He absolutely refuses to let her stay locked in that false conclusion. And that leads us to our final section, part 4, From Bitterness to Joy, Breaking Through. Against all her rigid, painfully defended conclusions, the impossible actually happens. Sarah gives birth at the age of 90. And what do they name the baby? Isaac, a name which literally translates from Hebrew to laughter. Think about that. The very thing that represented her deepest cynicism has been entirely redeemed. This captures the ultimate transformation we've been tracking today, a journey from the bitter smile to the laughter of joy. She goes from a cynical, solitary smirk of resignation hidden away behind a tent door to this infectious, open, communal laughter of genuine joy. She famously declares that God has brought her laughter, and everyone who hears about it will laugh with her. The isolation of cognitive closure has been completely shattered by shared joy. So we'll leave you with this final, lingering thought to apply to your own life. Think about the areas where you might have locked the door because waiting or trying again just hurts way too much. Are you ready to open the doors of your own closed heart? Will you let go of your own bitter smile, challenge your own cognitive closures, and allow yourself to hope beyond the heavy weight of your past disappointments?